Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This one is going to be for The Mandalorian Season 2 Episode 7, overall Chapter 15, and this one's called The Believer. So, the sort of penultimate episode of Season 2, we knew from the setup from last week roughly what we were going to get. We have to go get Mayfeld, and that was really about it. I think the episode actually was a lot more fun than I maybe expected it to be. I think the second they said, okay, Mayfeld is the character that we need to find Gideon, you sort of knew that, like, okay, it's probably going to feel a little bit more like one of these sort of side episodes rather than like a particularly mainline episode. And that's kind of what we got, but Mayfeld actually stood out a lot more as a character in this episode than he did in, I think it was episode 6 of the first season. And it's to the point where he ends off here. I wouldn't mind him coming back as a character, whereas after his first appearance I'm kind of like, okay, if he comes back, fair enough, but I don't really need to see this character again. I kind of wouldn't mind seeing him again after this one, so that was definitely good. I think overall what I'd say about this episode, though, is just that it was definitely fun, enjoyable. But if they didn't do the whole sequence of the Mandalorian taking his helmet off, I don't think there'd be a whole lot that's like particularly interesting in this episode. Just because when you really break it down, the main thing this episode accomplishes and does is just, we go to a planet to basically just get a code to find where Gideon's ship is. That's effectively the entire plot of the episode. We use Mayfeld to know the inner workings of the Imperials to get a code, and just to set up the last episode, which will be, I suppose, the big attack rescue mission to get Grogu back. So, it sets up the next episode really, really well. But I just think this episode itself, probably not the strongest episode we've ever had, but it still had really good fun, action, character moments, and so on. In that, like, for the most part, like, the whole team was here. At this point, I assume, going into the next episode, I assume they're not bringing Ahsoka on at all. I wish they'd explained that a little bit more, or at least mentioned her. Maybe there's still room just before we maybe exactly head out on the mission, and maybe we do bring Ahsoka on board. But I feel like it should be explained why we're not telling her that, like, oh yeah, the Empire has Grogu. Surely she would at least help, and it would be very valuable to have her. But again, we'll have to wait and see for the last episode. Ahsoka being back would be a really cool thing, but they seem fairly set that they're pretty good with the group that they have here, which is going to be the Mandalorian, Cara Dune, Fennec Shan, and Boba Fett. So I guess that's going to be our main group going into the actual rescue itself. Maybe they bring Ahsoka in, maybe they bring Bo-Katan in. The reason I say that is just because it would be pretty... We basically know that Bo-Katan is looking for Gideon as well, so why not? But I suppose, how long is the last episode? How much setup time before we start the mission do we actually have? Because depending how things play out, it might not make a lot of sense to... I suppose, effectively almost like give some of Bo-Katan's plot to the Mandalorian, depending on how that goes. In that, it feels like Gideon has to have a confrontation with Bo-Katan at some point, or at least explain how he is in possession of the Darksaber. Those sort of questions need to be answered. That's all stuff that will happen as we move into the next episode. But yeah, we start off, Mayfeld is in this kind of New Republic prison facility, which is like a junk planet. I get the impression it wasn't the junk planet that Darth Maul was found again on, but it could be a reference, who knows. And Cara Dune, as a New Republic marshal, basically takes him into her custody, and he's on board with the mission. They set up at the start that he's not going to be allowed to just go free. But of course, as we see by the end of the mission, he actually impresses everyone and he is allowed to go free. So that's an interesting little one in that, like I said, the big accomplishment of this episode was probably being like, yeah, Mayfeld jumped from just being kind of like an okay character from the first season to being quite interesting here. So where do we go? Is it Mordak? Or I think is where we go. Empire Imperial mining facility, a secret one where they mine rhydonium to use for explosives, I guess. There's a little bit of a, I suppose, story gone into, you know, once we get to Mayfeld's commanding officer and stuff like that. But we arrive on the planet, and pretty much the idea we get is that, okay, they have to get in. There's an Imperial terminal here where if you log into it, you can get access to the information that they need to find Gideon. They just have to get to that terminal. The only way on this planet to logically get in is to hijack one of the tank transports that's transporting the rhydonium. And so 2 people have to attack the tank and act as the drivers. That's how they're going to get in. The problem is they're going to get facial scanned, so people who are whose faces are already in the sort of database can't get scanned. So Fennec Shand is wanted by the ISB, so it can't be her. It can't be Boba Fett for I love this line of just, oh, you don't mind taking your helmet off, Boba? Why don't you do it? And then he's just like, yeah, I think they'd recognize my face. Just because, of course, he is basically the template for the clones. There's a lot of other people out there. The Empire would know exactly who he is, pretty much. So that's why he can't do it. So it leaves the only options being Mayfeld and the Mandalorian, because Cara Dune is New Republic, so as an enemy she'd be known as well. So that makes sense. So it immediately sets up the idea of, okay, if Mayfeld for whatever reason can't do it all himself, the Mandalorian is going to have to take off his helmet. So immediately quite interesting, because ever since he took his helmet off at the end of last season, it's kind of like, okay, is he going to do it again? They've, especially with the reveal that he's basically in a cult, and that a lot of those rules aren't necessarily like inherently just Mandalorian as you would expect it to be. He doesn't, you know, there's the question of like, do you have to follow these rules? Are these rules more important than anything? And what we're getting to now is this idea that his want to go after and get Grogu back is more important than anything in his life right now, including his creed about, you know, the whole rules surrounding his helmet. And I actually liked a lot of the comments from Mayfeld that because of the type of character that he is, and he's always trying to like crack a joke, he's just very open about like what he thinks and is willing to just talk very bluntly to the Mandalorian about like, you know, it's better with the helmet off. Like, do you have to do that? Is it a rule? Is the rule that you can't show your face, or is it that you can't take the helmet off? Which is it? And then he basically just gets across the idea of like, okay, you have all these rules and other people have rules as well, but when it comes down to it, if something important happens, do those rules actually matter? You want to be able to, like he says, sort of sleep at night. And do you want you know, abiding by some rule to be the thing that matters, or that you did what you needed to do? And I actually quite kind of like that sort of played throughout the whole episode of eventually the Mandalorian is put in a situation where the only way they can win is if he takes his helmet off and scans his face. And he's done it now to help Grogu, and realizing that how important Grogu is to him. So that was actually quite well done. I like the action sequence on the kind of tank buggy thing on the way to the facility. The attack from the pirates comes in. You have the tension of if they disturb the rhydonium too much, it will explode, and the fact that the previous transports have all been blown up before. That all worked. That was pretty well done, of just like, that's a tense action sequence. Mayfeld is driving, the Mandalorian is doing the fighting, but he's not in his usual armor. So it was fun to see moments like he gets hit on the side with one of the staffs and his, like, you know, shoulder armor just like explodes off him. and he's a little bit more vulnerable, but he's way more skilled than pirates. So even though they have thermal detonators, we get to see him in hand-to-hand combat, including some spear action, which I thought was nice setup for, I guess, what's going to be the focus of any big fight that happens in the last episode is going to be Beskar's spear versus Darksaber. We know he can wield a spear pretty well because he javelined one guy off with one of their own staffs, so that was pretty good. But the main, I suppose, core of this episode is that they get to the facility, and you've never been happier to see TIE fighters acting as support, taking out the rest of the pirates, and then they get celebrated by all of the other troops because they were the only transport to actually succeed in getting the Rhydonium to the facility. And it was kind of like, this is a weird situation of like kind of being happy that we've succeeded, but we've helped the Empire here, and they're happy that the mission succeeded. Like, kind of hard to know exactly how to feel in this situation. But they brought that back around, of course. And then, yeah, we pretty much get to it like, okay, things have calmed down, we're in the facility, the terminal's right over there, but sort of sitting right across from it is like the commanding officer here. And Mayfeld happens to know him. It's Mayfeld's former commanding officer. He has no idea if he actually will remember him or not, but why take the risk? So the Mandalorian is the one who has to go over to the terminal. He initially goes over, it scans his helmet, doesn't work, countdown timer, he's forced to take the helmet off and it scans him. I thought that, maybe it's just me completely not getting the logic here, but they were basically like, okay, if it scans you and it knows who you are, it'll alert everyone, of course. That's the idea that they were getting across, that if it's the known like criminal Fennec Shan or known New Republic officer Cara Dune, it'll obviously flare up and they'll be outed. But based on the fact that it succeeds for the Mandalorian, it seems like the way those terminals work is that once you have the Imperial sort of data stick thing, it'll just accept any face, like even an unknown, and give them access to the network just because they have the thing. I'm like, okay, so the register is just basically like that. It's a face, not a helmet. So some of the logic I don't think was quite great there, but it was an interesting enough situation to get him to actually have to take the helmet off. And it was nice to actually have a scene like this happen when he's not like injured and on the verge of death. So it's just, here he is, normally, just his face like unobscured by blood or anything like that. And Mayfeld is just like, oh, you can take it off. And he's just looking over at him like, oh, he did it. This, saving the kid obviously means quite a lot to him. And so he succeeds, but then when questioned by the officer about like, talk to your commanding officer, he has no idea what to say because he doesn't know the Imperial protocols, including like, I suppose, the details of what the trooper numbers are, the TK numbers. And so Mayfeld has to actually bail the Mandalorian out. So he comes in sort of last minute and is just like, oh yeah, that's my commanding officer, TK whatever, I'm TK this. He can't hear too well because of an incident on a previous mission, so I'll speak for him because he can't really talk. It was interesting to just see him go like, he just had no idea what to say, so he just played it silent the whole time. Which was a very interesting dynamic in that obviously you get some emotion out of him even when he's wearing the helmet, but you actually got a lot out of him that it was just his face of just seeing that like, oh, in other incidents like this, when he's wearing the helmet, he actually has that sort of expression on underneath, and it's just like that. It adds a little bit more kind of humanity to the character, knowing that like he's just like, I don't know what to say, and he has to be bailed out by Mayfeld. But yeah, we get into the situation where like the commanding officer, of course, realizes you're the two that actually brought the Rhydonium to us. Let's celebrate. Let's have a drink together. And we get this kind of really interesting and intriguing conversation where like, okay, well, what should we, have a drink to, basically, to celebrate? Not to health, it's too obvious. And then Mayfeld gets a bit personal here and is just like, what about this specific operation? And he's like, okay, yeah, that was a tough one. I had to make some tough decisions. And he just gradually like needles the officer about, like, a lot of people died during that mission and you didn't seem to care about them. More or less presenting to us, like, here is the reason he's not in the Empire anymore. Here is sort of like why he is where he was in the first episode of the first season where we saw him. And it's because this really affected him, seeing sort of how little the upper, the high-ups in the Empire actually care for their troopers. And he actually, cares about his other men and stuff like that. So it was interesting to just kind of get that slightly different perspective here of just like a soldier who feels that the high-ups really failed him and that's why he's left the Empire. And he, as a high up in the Empire, is just kind of like, we did what we had to do for the Empire. He's just so loyal to the Empire above all else. He was your typical, high up in the Empire that you hate. And so it was sort of like surprising but satisfying when Mayfeld just shot him. That he got something out of this mission as well from a personal point of view, in that he got revenge against the guy who, in his mind, sort of, changed his life in a way, made him turn against the Empire. And here's the guy who kind of nearly got him killed, and I suppose got most of his friends in the Empire killed. And so they fight their way out. We see Cara Dune and Fennec Shan acting as like snipers, helping their escape. Boba Fett comes in with the Slave One, and they basically manage to escape. Again, it's a pretty nice action sequence, but ultimately the escape goes pretty well. They do agree that Mayfeld will basically be like, yeah, I won't tell anyone I saw your face, and it's just left unsaid. Between like just before the last scene, we see the Mandalorian's back in his armor, so he puts his helmet back on, even though he has shown his face to other people. So that's an interesting one, in that seemed like a very hard, fast rule from before. He got around it the first time because it was a droid, so it's not technically a person, I suppose. This time, though, Mayfeld has seen his face. Other people in the Empire who are dead, I suppose, at this point, have seen his face. So they're basically going off the idea that because Mayfeld is committed to, I won't tell anyone I saw your face, it gets past the rule. But it shows that he's willing to tweak the rules to get what he needs to do. That he's either trying to, stick with it and just act like nothing actually happened, or he's actually going to have to deal with, maybe he doesn't have to follow the rules as closely as he thinks. Again, I'm hoping they maybe explore a little bit of this in the last episode. I'm guessing maybe what they might do as a satisfying end for the season will be that he just takes off his helmet and shows Grogu his face. I think, given the way the show has been, him willingly showing someone his face seems like the most obvious thing to do. And if he's willing to take his helmet off sort of for Grogu to get information to find him again and protect him, surely he at this point is willing to take the helmet off to show Grogu his actual face and establish a deeper connection between the two. But again, there's a lot to get through in the last episode before we actually get there. The episode actually ends with the Mandalorian sending a message, basically being like, you don't know what you have, you don't realize how important that kid is to me, I'm coming for you, basically. So, really nice setup of like the Mandalorian is up for a fight now. We know that he's basically said he really, really cares about Grogu, and he's going to be going in there all guns blazing, and it seems completely set up at this point. Gideon versus the Mandalorian. But let's not forget that there's also the Dark Troopers. There's no way they're not going to bring them into play. They're probably going to be the central threat of the episode, since we know most of our characters can deal with a ton of stormtroopers at easily. The Dark Troopers are going to be the main threat, with Gideon the other threat. I assume that they'll have something with Grogu going on where maybe he'll find a way to escape, because I guess they'll have to have Grogu get out while the Mandalorian is fighting Gideon or something along those lines. Again, it also depends, do they bring Ahsoka and so on with them or not? There's definitely a few questions like that in play. Plus Bo-Katan, if they have Bo-Katan and Ahsoka with them, then suddenly you've got two people, I suppose, capable of fighting Gideon. But we have to wait and see, of course. So yeah, this episode I thought was enjoyable. It definitely, I don't think, was the best episode of the season. Like I said before, just that in the grand scheme of things, the whole episode pretty much was just about getting a code. So it felt a little bit more like some of the earlier episodes of the season where, okay, the episode itself is good, but we're only accomplishing something rather small. But the way they go about doing it is good. And it was needed. It was a required next stage of the plot. Find where Gideon actually is. And they did that well. Mayfeld got some good development and set up for, okay, we're going to have to address something about the Mandalorian and how he views taking his helmet on or off, because, you know, we're just relying on the fact that, okay, Mayfeld's not going to tell anyone because he's allowed to go free, but the Mandalorian knows he did that. He has shown his face to other people. And the Creed, like, you can only get around it so much, so he has to address that. So, yeah, I'm very interested to see where they go from here. We I suppose at this point know there's going to be an Ahsoka spin-off show and a, what is it, Guardians of the High Republic or something like that. I can't remember the other show that they announced recently. So there's going to be two shows basically interconnected with this timeline. They didn't directly confirm The Mandalorian Season 3, but I'm guessing there is going to be a Season 3. And we know that the spin-off shows, and it's going to build up to some sort of a event where the shows will all have a big sort of intertwined sequence. So that's going to be pretty exciting as we go into the future. I guess that confirms to us, you know, okay, it doesn't mean Ahsoka has to appear in The Mandalorian to have anything happen. She is going to have her own show. So that maybe excludes her out from maybe being in the last episode. She just got the initial introduction here, and everything important with her will happen in her own show, but we have to wait and see. So there are my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.